So, hello guys, and welcome to the Father's Rhythm. This is, in fact, the first actual podcast without video that we're going to do. And it's kind of exciting because I don't feel like I've got to fix my hair or think about what t-shirt I wear or think, you know what, did I wear that t-shirt on the last video? I'm just chilled right now. I've got a flat cap head going on because I wore a hat to drop my son off at school. I'm not even going to tell you what t-shirt I'm wearing because you might check the videos and go, I knew it. He hasn't really got style. He just wears the same stuff. So here we go, the first podcast. And man, I'm super excited about doing this. I'm just excited about the trajectory that God is taking everybody on. I'm in general just excited about God and his nature. There's something that's profoundly affected me recently as I go on my endeavors to explore the human body, the mind, the soul, the spirit. It leads you to intellectual paths. So when you're looking at things, for example, like the body or the mind, it leads you to neuroscience, physics, biology, certain elements of chemistry involved. And a lot of the knowledge is on a very intellectual level. And I find myself after a while getting quite bamboozled with some of the technical terms. Now, of course, that isn't the foundation of why I believe what I believe, although it does provide me a platform in which to learn from. But as I delve deeper into these intellectual realms, I realize that, and this is one of the amazing things that I love about the character of God, is that all this intellect in the bigger picture, it doesn't matter. And it's not for everybody to know. And it's not needed for everybody to know. And our movement of love and the movement of the Spirit of Christ moving through this generation, it's not based on intelligence. It's based, if you want to base it on intelligence, it's based on the intelligence of love, which is heart intelligence. And it transcends words. It transcends then vocabulary. It transcends human wisdom, and it taps into heavenly wisdom where words fail. But love stands and love remains. And Paul writes in his letters about everything that is passing, but love will remain. And fortunately, love can't be explained with intellect. Love is so big, so vast, so all-encompassing, and it's available. And we're available to go deeper into that love and know that love, and love is God. And God isn't based on an intellectual theory or concept, even though there's room for intellect, there's room for research, there's room for words to be able to describe things. There's room for all of these things. It is necessary in some way. But it's just curious that as I personally delve deeper into these realms where intellect's applied, I find myself coming away and breathing and realizing it's not about how clever you are. It's not about what you can put together in word format. It's not about how much you know. It's not about knowledge. Doesn't the Bible say that knowledge puffs us up? Wow. Yeah. So guys, just before we, get into this, and I aim for this to be fluid. So I don't actually have a structure. I have nothing in front of me. I'm just going with revelation from my heart. But before that, I think we're just going to take a little bit of time together on this podcast to just do some centering. Now, if you watch the videos, you know about centering. Some people call it recollection, recalibration, but whatever it is, together we're just going to go in. Now, my description of this is we're going to move now into the bliss and into the whack. So I invite you into the bliss and into the whack. And this is a place where your physical body can be filled with the joy and presence of God. your physical body can be filled here with the joy and presence of God, and you'll start to feel it in your body, in your physical body. And because of that, it's actually going to change your brain waves and your heart pattern and heart and brain connection. And it's going to make you feel what I would call shalom, which is peace, or a bit of whack. So I'm just going to say some words and do a little bit of breathing, and then we're going to get into it, okay? Okay, so first of all, let's take 3 really deep breaths. So we go really deep, so maybe 4 seconds on the way in, hold it at the top, and a nice deep breath on the way out. We turn in to the resource of heaven. We turn into heavenly wisdom. We turn into Yeshua, Jesus Christ, our Savior, the salvation of our body, soul, and the enlightening of our spirit. Yeah, guys. So maybe you want to say some of your own declarations or some of your own words. It's such a fascinating concept that as you speak what you believe and as you declare what you believe, it actually changes the atmosphere around you, and it changes your internal atmosphere. So I don't know about you, but already just breathe in and the focus on Jesus, I'm feeling blasted, which is probably a good thing for me. I'm not sure how good it is for you, because we want to start talking about stuff quite soon. But let's do another 3 breaths. And this time, as we breathe, we're just going to concentrate on the joy and the drunkenness of Jesus, the joy and drunkenness, okay? So let's do that. Way, here we go. Wow. Thank you, Father, that you disobey logic, that you go beyond in your relentless pursuit for our freedom. Thank you for your drunkenness and your love. Shaka, shaka. Wow. Okay, guys. So let me just, if you can hear in the background, Alexa's got something going on there. I thought it'd be nice to have some therapeutic sounds as I speak, but let me knock it down a bit. Alexa, volume 3. Okay, guys. So we're going to be talking about the body today, first and foremost. Wow. And, we might go off key and say a few things and whatnot, but hopefully you'll take some good things from this. And yeah, so let's get into it. So the word says, the beautiful Bible says to us that Jesus is the salvation of our body, soul, and spirit. It actually says in Thessalonians, may your whole body, soul, and spirit be preserved in the day of Jesus Christ. Now, there's much in that verse, but what we're going to be concentrating on is the preservation of body. There is something to do with the body, guys, that we cannot separate from the journey of an anointed one. And an anointed one is you, because you are a Christ-like one. So the Bible says that as he is, so you will be, and so you actually are. So everything that the Bible says about Jesus, he says about you. He went to the cross, you went to the cross with him. He rose, you rose with him. Everything that the word says about Jesus as a son is a reflection of who you truly are. It's your true identity. Now, Jesus, he hosted immortality. There's a great prophet who has actually gone to be with Jesus out of his skin now, out of his body, called Cobus van Rensburg. And I remember listening to a talk one time, and he was saying how Jesus was immortal, and the only way that they could take Jesus out was by his say-so. And that's why the complete heinous act of his murder was only done because he allowed it to happen. And even in that, he had to let his spirit go from his body, because the injuries that he would endured, if he was just human, he would of course died because of the lashings, because of the asphyxiation on the cross, of course, and overall because of the beating that he was given. So we've got to understand here that that wasn't just a crucifixion. Crucifixion in and of itself, of course, is something that is unimaginable pain-wise. But it wasn't just a crucifixion with Jesus. He was cold-blooded, murdered, and beaten. And he went through that. And Cobus van Rensburg says that Jesus hosted immortality. And when I first heard that, I felt something inside me go, wow, yeah, of course. Why did I not think about that? We always talk about Jesus dying. But what about the immortal Jesus that gave himself over to death? And that began a journey, a biblical journey for me, where I started to look at the Bible and realize that, of course, it's been here all along. Because by his death, he overcame death so that we don't have to die. Paul had the gospel of life and immortality. So if Paul had the gospel, the good news of Christ, of life and immortality, then surely Christ also had the same thing. And then as whoa, shaka. Wow. And then as I went deeper into the word and started to read the gospels of Jesus, I started to realize it had been there all along. When the Jews took Jesus onto the cliffside and wanted to throw him off, Jesus said, "This is not my time." He was speaking from immortality. He walked through a crowd of angry Jews. I'm not sure if you guys have ever been taken to a cliffside by an angry crowd of Jews, but I'm going to presume that they would be able to chuck you off that cliff. But it was not his time. When they wanted to attack him in the temple, it says that he hid because it was not his time. And when he was hiding, what do you think that was? Do you think that he quickly, hid behind a wall or went under someone's cloak, or a few people surrounded him? Or was he playing a quick game of hide and seek with the rest of the guys? No, he was switching realms. He was hiding himself by the Spirit. Wow, so that they couldn't find him because it was not his time. And Jesus says that even in the earliest miracle that we have within the Gospels, which is the change in water into wine, which is a reflection, of course, of wine being the blood, when his mother in that particular gospel story talks to him about the wine, he says, "It is not my time yet." As a reflection, it's not my time yet to pour out my blood, to pour out the new wine. But he knew his task and his scroll and his destiny was to be the sacrifice for mankind. But what it said is that that sacrifice was made perfect by his sufferings, because it was fitting for God to make the captain of our salvation, the captain of the saving of your body. Listeners, listen to this. The captain of the salvation of your body. It was fitting that the captain of the salvation of your body would go through sufferings, so that in all ways he has been like you. So what that means, guys, is that Jesus Christ was made perfect, as the Bible says. He wasn't born perfect in the sense that his DNA wasn't needed to be renewed. It was. In the record of Jesus Christ when he was born was the record of death. That record of death came from the bloodline of Mary. Jesus went through a process of renewing his DNA and hosting his body by his spirit and fully coming into the fullness of immortality post 30. He then allowed his death to happen as the good shepherd who lays his life down because nobody could take it. So what he did is he actually became immortal in the body so that you now have the record to be able to take on the same image. That's why he says, my body I give to you. Why does he give you his body? Because that same body that he's given to you, that is inside the bread and the wine that you take, which, by the way, when you take this, it has a spiritual resonance with the physical realm, but the spiritual root of that is actually his transfigured body that you're consuming. And when you're drinking the blood, you're taking light form. You're taking pure light into your body, and your body is actually taking on the record of what Jesus actually went through. So when you take the body and the blood, you're taking on the record of immortality, the record of what Yeshua did and went through as the captain of our salvation that must be made perfect through his sufferings. You're taking on that record. Okay? Now, it was fitting that that captain would lay his life down so that we should not die, because he's already died our death. So it says that, right? That it was fitting that he would die so that we don't have to. It says that in Hebrews. So you've got to understand that this task of Jesus was not to save us out of hell. That's not the task. And if it was to save us out of hell, it's to save us from our own internal hell. It was much bigger than that. It was to save you from death itself. It was to impart in you the ability to overcome the record of death, trauma, and destruction within your DNA and transfigure. If we are meant to be in the same image as Yeshua, as Jesus Christ, that is a transfigured image. Because last time I checked, he transfigured on the mount. He transfigured in front of Peter and James on the mount, and they were bamboozled, man. They were bamboozled. He started shining, and they went, what do you want us to do? Do you want us to build a tent? And Jesus is like, what? What a response. What a flipping response. Jesus transfigures, and they go, you know what, guys, let's build tents. This isn't a time for outdoors events, Peter. You know, there's a time and a place for that. I'm surprised he didn't say, hey, let's get our fishing rods out, because he just didn't know what to do with that current moment. I don't think I'd be talking about tents or fishing rods, though. I'd probably just hit the floor. I don't know why I'm talking about... This is what happens, right, when I'm whacked. Who the heck would say a fishing rod when we're talking about that biblical story about his tent? I don't know, man, but now I've got images of Peter and James and John. Was John even there? I don't know. I think there was 3 of them. There might have been 2 of them. I've now got images of them chucking the rod in the water whilst Jesus is transfiguring. And Jesus is like, come on, guys, look, I'm glorious. And they're like, 2 minutes, I'm just waiting for the catch. Anyway, I digress in a very weird fashion. So, Jesus is the saving of our body, our physical body. And we can see that throughout the New Testament. We have an immortal Jesus, and then a Jesus who lays his life down because nobody can take it. Now, everything that the Bible says about Jesus is also about you. So because you have laid your life down, wow, nobody can take it. You are the powerful one. You've laid your life down, nobody can take it. Okay? So that's what Jesus said, right? I am the good shepherd. Nobody can take my life. I lay my life down when I decide, okay? So he stepped aside in his physical body as we know it to go through a process of death so that we don't have to then take his body back and say, I told you so. There you go, guys. So he really raises the bar with the whole concept of what we believe for ourselves. And what Jesus does is he says that any idea that you have of sickness and illness and disease and degeneration of your cells and aging and time in your body aging, any idea that you have of that, I just blew that thing up. So you can listen to the most clever physician, neuroscientist, biologist, whatever you want to listen to, and ultimately the wisdom of God has made that foolish, because the wisdom of God says that I took a body that was completely flatlined, I resurrected that thing, and now it is perfect. And now it cannot even interact with the record of death, because the risen body of Yeshua is perfect. And Jesus Christ extends the invitation for us to go through that same process of transfiguration, where intelligence can't stand there. Because human intellect will say that that's impossible, of course, because we can't measure it. We can't apply scientific evidence to say that this is a hard fact. But that's why it says it was fitting that God would use the foolishness of the cross to shame the wisdom of humans, because the cross is a message that is a real stumbling block, because the cross is a message for everyone. The cross is all inclusive. Wow. The cross is a message for everybody, and that's offensive, especially when the cross releases life and immortality. As a human race at this particular moment, we're putting a lot of our wealth into understanding immortality. We're trying to build robots at the moment so we can transfer consciousness. We're building cryo chambers that we can freeze the body, and then when we have enough science and the medical field's advanced enough, we can then bring that body back to life. And people are being frozen, for example. We have billions of dollars a year being plowed into understanding stem cell therapy and the regeneration of cells, because we want, as a human race, immortality. We want it, and we are trying so hard to get there. And in some way, I think that's a reflection of what's going on in heaven, but that's a reflection, and that is reflected inside the chaos of man. In the rest of God, we don't need to rigorously try to work stuff out. We need to rely on love to mold us in love's image. Whereas we have billions and billions and billions and billions now of dollars, pounds, euros, whatever you want, I mean, even crypto, being poured into the concept and the possibility of immortality in the body, or immortality in the body and immortality of the mind. But this is an ancient thing that Yeshua went through and imparts to us. So not only do I want to say that it's a possibility spiritually, I want to say that the world is even directing us that way. That's what's happening now. You can read magazines. I do my own research, and at the end of the day, I don't research. I do research for you guys in some way, so I can put things together in a digestible way. But you'd have to go and do your own research. But there is multiple studies and medical mags where very credible doctors are now believing that our longevity over the next couple of decades is going to really, really rise in the advancement of medicines, etc. And we can see this because of all the money going in, that there is likely going to be some more breakthroughs. Even if you look at, for example, the age now that you can take your pension, the pension schemes now have said, no, it's going to have to be later because people are living longer. And people are living longer because there is ways of us being able to keep the body in a more livable state, shall we say, for longer periods of time. There's a whole debate around, is life better now because people are being sick longer, etc. But that's not something we're going to get into today. But what we are going to say is that there is a reflection in the world of what the Bible says about immortality. Now, we're going to change gears now. Now we've grasped the concept that Jesus Christ was and is immortal, and he went through death so that we don't have to, and that by his body and his blood we have a record that we can engage with and come into that place. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the body. I don't know if you can hear this in the background. That's my dog drinking water. It's one of the most lovely sounds ever. I love it when he goes for a drink. I just sit there and smile and think, there he goes again. I mean, that isn't drinking water. He's necking pints of the stuff. Rocky, can you hear him? He's still going for it. I'm going to have to wait till he stops, aren't I? Because I can't concentrate. Right, he's coming back in now. So we have the biblical framework. That's what I wanted to put in place, the biblical framework. And now we're going to look at our physical body, and we're going to just delve in a little bit. Now, I want to tell you first of all, that you are extremely powerful, that you are bigger than your thoughts, that you're bigger than your nervous system, that you're much bigger than your brain. Okay? Now, we're going to get very simplistically biological here, and we're going to talk about the body in a simple way. And I want to extend some of this knowledge to you for the sake of you understanding that you're in control. This isn't just for information's sake. So your body comprises of a central nervous system, which is your brain and your spinal cord. Your body also comprises of something called the peripheral nervous system, which basically is a link between the organs and the skin, and it links into the central nervous system. And you have also a cranial nervous system and something called a vagus nerve. Now, you're not going to have remembered all that, and that's absolutely fine. You don't need to. But our nervous system, our central nervous system, interacts with the other nervous systems to basically bring about feeling in the body, to bring about regulation in our organs, to send signals to our brain if an environment is exciting, if the body needs to start secreting like adrenaline and certain hormones, because there is a imminent threat that awaits us. And basically, this nervous system, which includes your brain, by the way, because your brain is part of the central nervous system, this nervous system is plastic. It's malleable, and it's ever-changing. And your nervous system, and my nervous system, has learned reactive ways of protecting you and me, and it's time to rewire the thing, okay? It's time to rewire the thing. So let me tell you a little bit about how the nervous system works. Now, as you were a child, you grew up, and when you grew up, you would have certain experiences happen to you. You would have the experience of the relationship with your caregivers, so your mother, father, or maybe they were absent. And then you would have had, come on then, Rocky, you coming up? You would have experiences happen to you. And what happens is when you have experiences, both of your early life and your caregiver's attention and care towards you, and then certain experiences that happen in your early years, within your brain and within your nervous system starts to be imprinted patterns. And these patterns initially are imprinted for your benefit because they protect you. So for example, you learn from anxiousness or worry from an early age when an event happens or number of events happen. And that's not a bad thing at an early age because it protects you. And the reason it protects you is because your signal from your nervous system will instruct your body to react in a certain way. So that would be namely to secrete adrenaline and cortisol. And both of these prepare you to move fast, fight or flight mode. And it's a good thing. It's a protective measure that you've created for yourself, okay? So then we have these patterns in our nervous system, and they serve us well in our early years. But then as we begin to grow up, these patterns are actually really destructive because we don't need them anymore. They served us, but they're not serving us anymore. So that's why when we look at things like, worry or anxiety or, bodily feelings, raised heart rate, tight chest, sick stomach, that's actually your body telling a story from the past. And what we need to do is rewrite the past story that we went through with a new story. And of course, this is simplified, but I think that in the simplistic way is the more powerful way. I think when you try and go too intellectual with this, my personal belief is that it doesn't work. It leads you down just so many other paths. So we can reprogram this nervous system. We need to teach our nervous system that we're not afraid anymore, because these patterns that have been built in our brain and the nervous system have served us, but they're not serving us anymore. So, for example, if we now go into a room, and when we go into a room and other people are there, if our chest starts to tighten and we start to lose the ability to swallow, which is one of the symptoms of anxiety, and that's because your vagus nerve goes through your throat, and when it is not firing as it should be, you find it difficult to swallow. That's just linked to your nervous system. Or if you go in a room and you freeze, what has happened is your fight or flight signals in your nervous system have now learnt a method of protection that are firing completely off key for you. So you're trying to protect yourself in an environment where you just don't need protecting anymore. So then what do? We teach ourselves from the mind of Christ that we're safe. We allow a journey of transformation to happen where God releases us and teaches us that everything's okay again, and that it's okay to relax. It's okay for the body to relax. Because what happens is that when patterns are built up within our brain and our nervous system, we just react to triggers, almost like a computer. So you go in environments, a trigger from the environment makes you react. You have a thought and your brain sends signals to the nervous system. Your nervous system then sends signals to your organs. Then your heartbeat may become slightly irregular, etc., etc. And then physiologically, you'd be able to see a difference in your face. Maybe your eyes would be wider, etc. And this is a collective job of the body to protect you. However, as we've just discussed, we don't need that any longer. It's not serving us any longer. And that's why we shouldn't look at anxiety as a bad thing, or worry, or whatever it may be that you're having as a feeling in the body as a bad thing, or depression, for example. It isn't in and of itself a bad thing. It's a protective measure that is trying to show you that there's something under the surface. There is a pattern under the surface that needs attention. And that pattern under the surface needs rewiring. So I remember God explained it to me like this one time. He said, "Son, imagine you have some lush grass." And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Imagine that in the middle, you trampled on that grass, in the middle of the grass." He said, "What would the grass look like?" And I was like, "Well, there'd be a big patch." And he went, "Yeah, there would be. And then if you wanted to get to the other side of that grass, how would you do it?" And I said, "Well, I'd start walking and, I'd probably go through the middle where the patch was and then get to the other side." He went, "Yeah." And then he went, "And then if you wanted to come back, where would you go?" And I said, "Well, I'd take the most efficient route, which would be back through the path, through the middle." He said, "Yeah. And then if someone else would come, what do you think they would do?" I said, "Well, they'd take the same path." And he said, "Exactly." And what God was describing to me there is he was describing a traumatic event and then how the brain works in terms of pathways. So the traumatic event, for example, or traumatic events, because it doesn't have to be one, is the patch in the middle. So something happens to us, and when it's traumatic, the brain reacts to it and it remembers it, okay? The mind remembers it. And then when something similar, which is a trigger, happens again, the neuron in our brain fires across the pathway that it's learned, across through the trauma and to the other side. And thus we have then a pathway through trauma, okay, that's being created. Let's call it created by trauma. So the traumatic event is caused in that lush grass, which is the beautiful area of your brain. And it could be your mind, but we're going to call it brain today, okay? Brain and mind are different, but let's call it brain today. So inside your brain, there is lush grass, a traumatic event happens, and then there is a tree of neurons that remember what has happened. And then as a trigger comes through, it passes through these neurons and to the other side. And thus there's created a pathway. Now, the more triggers that happen, the more times it goes down that pathway, the more strong the pathway becomes. Actually, the more neurons collectively come together to make that a stronger pathway that it can move through. Now, what we need to then do, and what we can do and invited to do with the mind of Christ, is get rid of the trauma and then walk through the lush grass around it and build a new heavenly pathway in the brain. Okay, and this is something that God has taken me through. And on the topic of immortality, it is imperative that we go through this process of releasing the trauma and building new pathways. So the way we do that, first of all, of course, is offer ourselves as a living sacrifice to Yeshua, to Jesus Christ. And for those who are listening to this, who are hearing me say Yeshua and think, why do you call him that? It's actually his Hebraic name. And sometimes I like to call him that, face to face with him, I call him Jesus, or sometimes call him Yeshua. It depends. So if I interchangeably use those two words, that's why. So we need to present ourselves as a living sacrifice. And when we do, Jesus will begin to take us on a journey of renewal. And one of the areas is renewal of trauma, because trauma has had an effect on us. And trauma has effectively built up a persona around us to protect us. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit just after I mention a little bit more on this lush grass. So the job of Jesus with you is to remove the trauma. So remove that initial hit that happened in the middle of that green grass. He removes that so lush grass can grow. And as lush grass is growing, and by the way, lush grass grows by you thinking differently. And all of a sudden, there is no pathway through the trauma, okay? There is no pathway through the trauma. So then what we do is, with thinking like the mind of Christ, we build a new pathway through heavenly experience, okay? So then a new patch forms by heavenly experience, and then we have a beautiful pathway through the brain, which is built on heaven, okay? And that is part of the journey that we're on. Wow. So I just mentioned trauma, and we're going to touch on that a little bit. So all of us have experienced trauma to some degree, and it's usually experienced throughout life, and it has its greatest effects as a child. And the reason it has its greatest effects as a child is because your brain is in sponge mode. As you get older, your brain changes, and you're able to use things like reason more, and you're able to use what I would call your mind, and especially the mind of Christ. And because of that, your brain isn't as sponge-like as when it is when you are a young child. And it's been said that actually from the ages of 0 to 6, your child is in somewhat of a hypnotic state, which means a subconscious state, and is taking in all of this information, sensory information, and forming a belief system about the world and a protection mechanism around the world. And this is why trauma has played such a large role. So when you're young, in your early years, from ages 0 to 7, everybody experiences trauma on different levels. So you may have somebody who grows up in a home where there's no mother or father about, and they're in care, and the caregivers there are addicted to drugs, okay? And there's going to be some real fundamental patterns built within the brain system that are extremely traumatic, and there's going to be trauma indents inside the psyche of that individual that is going to be really tough. It's going to make things really tough as that particular individual grows up, although that individual will have choice because the individual still has a mind and is not a robot. However, those traumatic events will have led that particular child to build a system to protect itself and usually to soothe itself. So if you live in a traumatic childhood like that, and I know I explained something that is extremely traumatic, but we could also use other examples, but for now I'm going to use that. And then what then happens is, as that child grows up, to soothe the pain usually is addiction. Now, addiction can be anything from pornography to alcohol to drugs to shopping, to playing on your phone, to wanting to meet people, to changing clothes so often, to focusing solely on one particular subject, like, I don't know, football. You can get addicted to it. And the addiction is anything that removes you from your current state of pain to soothe you. So then what happens is, because we've had a traumatic childhood, we then soothe ourselves with addiction, and we build a persona that protects us. So we have a way of interacting with the world which we think at that current state, unless we become aware and conscious with the mind of Christ, we think it protects us. But basically what is happening is we are giving off a false impression of ourselves to the world because it's been formed by trauma. So at its very root, it is fear. Okay. Now, all of us have been through this to some degree, and most of it comes through your early years in life. And that's why it's important that as we develop with Christ, we allow the Father and Mother heart of God to reparent us. As good as your parents might have been, I'm just going to say this, your parents aren't God and they've never been God. They may be able to love you in a certain way, but they haven't loved you like God fully. But God wants to teach us and extend to us, encompass us in the full love, the mother love, wow, and the father love of heaven that removes the trauma of our early childhood and takes us into a trajectory, I can't even say the word, trajectory of having a new way of thinking from being mothered and fathered perfectly. You know, there's a word for God in the Hebrew, it is El Shaddai, and it means the many-breasted one. It is reflection of the mother heart of God that says, I have everything that you need. You know, what does the breast do? It nourishes the child. God is saying to you, listen, I have everything that you need. Let me nourish you like your parents couldn't. Let me nourish you like your parents couldn't. Let me father you, show you the way of wisdom and instruction like your father couldn't. It's okay, you know. There's no room for blame here, you know, because emotional and traumatic patterns are passed down. They're passed down. So if I am emotionally traumatic, I'll pass that to Harry. Harry, unless he becomes conscious, will pass it to his kids. Unless they become truly aware and conscious and spiritual, they will pass it on. Trauma goes through the line like that. It goes through the bloodline. Does the Bible not teach us that? From a scientific point of view, we also are starting to come to the knowledge of that, what the Bible says. Does the Bible not say the sins of your fathers and your fathers and your fathers and your fathers? What does sin mean? It means missing the mark. What is missing the mark? It means living in the trauma of not being enlightened. So God even talks about in the Bible how it's passed down through the bloodlines. Of course it is. And it also has a spiritual element and entities that are attached to that I'm going to get onto in a little bit. So we can now see that whoever we are, wherever we are, we've had trauma happen to us. And to give you an idea, trauma could be having a brother and sister and more attention shown to your particular sibling than yourself. So then you have created mechanisms to cope with that. And you might not even know about it. You just think that it is you. But in a subconscious way, your life will now, your life will now reflect your subconscious. And in your subconscious will be protection mechanisms that have come and stemmed from the idea that your brother is loved more than you, for example. Or it could be like the first example that I mentioned, which was, you know, living in a home where your mother and father aren't present and there's a lot of addiction, etc. Or it could simply be that when you were young, your mother went away for long trips at the start, okay? So then you actually start to learn within yourself anxiousness, a lot of anxiousness, and patterns are built within you because your caregiver, your mother, has left and then is coming back, and then you build systems around that at a very, very early age. And we need to understand that these happen early. Even when you're in the womb, if your mother is racked with worry, you can start to experience that, okay? So we're not talking, you don't need to be, 3-year-old, 4-year-old. We're talking from very early age. We're like a sponge, and we become what we're surrounded by in the environment that we're in. So trauma has been experienced by everybody. You're not alone if you think that, hey, but I had the worst childhood. And also, if you think that you haven't experienced trauma because your parents were great, the reality is that you have. And we definitely have as kids, but then a lot of us have also experienced traumatic events as adults as well. And that literally, as I mentioned, creates patterns and changes the way our nervous system reacts to things. Now, the good news is that Jesus is taking us now on the journey of the removal of the trauma. Now, if you go to look in neuroscience, some neuroscientists will say that trauma can never truly be overcome. It can be learned to deal with, and you can change your physiology towards that trauma. So what that means, if a traumatic event has caused triggers which gives you panic attacks, with mindfulness, you can change the way your body receives that, so you'll no longer have panic attacks, but you'll never truly remove the trauma, okay? Other people who are more on a hypnotic level believe you can go into the subconscious mind, and in the subconscious mind, you could relive or go back to the initial memories of where this trauma originated from and remove this trauma, and therefore you'll never have to live out of it. Now, I completely agree with the hypnotic side of things, although I don't think that we need necessarily hypnosis to go through this. Now, I don't want you to be weirded out by hypnosis because it's not something I've ever done because I've never needed to, but this is me just giving you examples. Now, what I believe and what's already happened in my life. So God has taken me through this. So remember, guys, I don't often speak about things that I don't experience. There's sometimes I may do, but I don't often. Now, God has taken me through a process of clearing out what is a pattern in my brain, in my body, and removing that trauma. Now, wow. 1 second, man, I'm just getting blasted off this. What I don't want to do, guys, and the reason that I pause every now and again is because I want things to be clear for you. And I know that this is a lot of information, but I know that you'll take what you need from it. I just want it to be clear. I'm talking about the mind and the brain at times, and they definitely are different. But sometimes through this talk, I've used them a little bit interchangeably because perhaps you don't know them yet as different. So we're going to learn more and more about that, but the mind is different to the brain. The mind of Christ cannot be contained within the brain. The brain is a reflection of your mind. What we're going to do is say that for now, okay? So inside our mind, we can have the record of trauma inside our subconscious mind, which then reflects on the brain, and inside the brain then, we have a physical substance, which are neurons that collectively come together, which keep the record of the trauma. Okay, so remember the analogy we gave of the lush green grass, and then the middle part being trampled on. That would be a reflection of the brain, which is a reflection of what's going on in the mind. Okay, now this comes from the subconscious mind because traumatic events happen. And we're not conscious of them constantly throughout life, but they're in our subconscious. And when we then come into an environment where it triggers our subconscious, that's when our body then reacts to that, our brain and our nervous system that comes, of course, the central, as I mentioned earlier, is your nervous system, your brain, your spinal cord, okay? So Jesus takes us on a journey of removing the trauma, removing the trauma from our mind and from the pattern that's been established in our brain. Now, this is a wonderful journey. Now, let me tell you, I'm going to give you some examples of how Jesus has done that with me. And yeah, I'm just going to give you it in my language how it has happened. So, okay. So I'm really getting close to home here. This is kind of like, I'm slightly nervous about talking about these things, but I'm comfortable that there's no shame where I exist, and that I'm talking from my spirit. So really the idea of being vulnerable, I can just chuck that out because vulnerability says that there's something that could happen that could actually have a bad outcome, but it can't. It can only be good. So actually, I'm just being open. So because I had drug and alcohol abuse through pretty much all my teenage years and then adult years, I abstained from drinking alcohol for a period of time when I came to Christianity, and then I met Jesus, and then he introduced alcohol back in my life. But soon after that, I began to realize that every time I drank alcohol, there was this desire in me to just keep on drinking. And for most part, I would batter that desire down. I would really, as Paul would say, I would bring my body into subjection. So my neurons would be firing in my brain saying, look, we have this pattern, act this way. And I'd be beating that central nervous system into subjection. Look at how I got the nervous system in with the Bible there. But I would have it. And every now and again, I'd go way over the top and I'd end up drunk. And I'd feel so guilty, and I'd think, how can God has given me all of these experiences with him and all this wonderful stuff in my life, and then I'd be drunk? What an absolute slob, what an idiot. And Jesus said to me, son, you can overcome this. Pick yourself up and come again. You can overcome this. Pick yourself up and come again. But then each time I drink alcohol, I'd have this same desire. And I put that down to, I just love to be vibrant, to be partying, which is a good thing. And Jesus agreed, yeah, that is a good thing in a controlled manner. But there was still something there that wanted to switch me into going too far, which then led me into basically, if you're drunk, what happens? Your body's completely out of sync, and it can lead you down paths where you don't want to go, and it just makes you even in a write-off. And this happened over a period, really, of about, let's say, 3 years. And every now and again, I'd drink too much, and then I'd think, why did I do that? And I'd feel really, down on myself. But that's another thing that God taught me out of. But anyway, and then I had a vision inside a dream. That's another topic of conversation. And in this, I saw very, very clearly that this desire for alcohol, it had a traumatic root, or this desire for a need to continue had a traumatic root. And at that stage, I didn't research too much about trauma, but I just knew that there was something that could be uprooted. Now, I believe that in heaven there is a judicial system, there is a court system like we have on earth. So we have a system on earth whereby if you go to court, you are tried for your crime, and if there's enough evidence to suggest you're guilty, you are guilty and you're punished. And if there's enough evidence to suggest you're not, you're let off. I believe heaven has the same system, but the system rules every time that you're free, because of the sacrifice of Jesus, which means that any traumatic event that you've went through, heaven's already paid for that through Christ. Anything that needs removed from you, Jesus, he's already paid for it. So you've probably heard that Jesus paid the price for your sin. And what that means is Jesus has paid the price for all the trauma. Anything that might be inside you that has a foothold in you, that maybe it can be from bloodline stuff. So it can come through your parents. It could be genetically, or it could be things that you've built up through your own actions. He's paid the price for the lot. And when Jesus in relationship, reveals to us that there's trauma, we can then take this to the courtroom of heaven. So when I saw this in my vision, I knew that I could have this thing removed. And it was such an exciting time for me, because I thought to myself, I can't flipping believe it. All this time, I thought that I just needed to be wiser in the moment. In fact, there's a root to it that I can get rid of. And I was like, Jesus, why didn't you let me know about this before? Why only now? I could have saved my friends a few headaches, but you decided in your sovereignty to let me go through that. And that says something in and of itself, by the way. Don't be quick to judge. To let me go through that, because he thought that I could manage it to the degree I needed to without it getting too out of hand. And eventually he would teach me how to remove it. So what I then did is I brought that into the court of heaven. Jesus, of course, as the sacrifice of the blood, has forgiven me. And by his forgiveness, I applied that. And that root, that traumatic root, was then removed from me. Listen to me, guys. Since I've done that, I do not have that desire anymore. Are you listening? I don't have that desire anymore. My friends have said, you're different now when you drink alcohol. Said you were always fine until, sometimes you just seem to go into this mode where you wanted to just keep going, but you're not doing that. And I can tell you this, guys, friends, brothers and sisters, I can promise you this. The feeling that I once had, I don't have anymore. I am not fighting with myself. I'm not fighting with my pattern, with my former pattern and trauma. It isn't there. And like we explained, the lush grass, that trauma's been removed, and now lush grass is growing over the top, that now I can build a heavenly root on that lush grass that reflects heaven. And this isn't the only thing. I'm going to mention one more testimony around the removal of trauma, because this is a biggie, and a lot of people have suffered from this, and scientifically, we don't even know what this is yet. Sleep paralysis. So I suffered from sleep paralysis it started happening when I was about 15, because I started taking drugs when I was 14. It came through spiritually through drugs, and I suffered from sleep paralysis up until a few months ago. So we're talking 5 years of my life. No, I'm joking. I'm 31, so you do the maths. So I suffered all that time. Now, again, I had a vision inside a dream, which is something we can get onto at another time. And let me just take a sip of this water. And it was revealed to me inside the vision in the dream that this paralysis had a traumatic root and I could remove it. And when I came out of this, the first thing I did was I called my bro and I said, mate, you won't believe this. You know the alcohol thing that I got rid of? And there's 3 things. I'm going to give you a testimony of 2. And I said, I'm about to get rid of this. And he's like, what? And you know what? I waited the whole day because I was so excited to take it to the courtroom of heaven. I waited the whole day. So it was almost like I had a present in front of me and I knew for a fact I was going to open it, but I was waiting to open it. So I was just excited the whole day about doing this. And then I waited on the night till I was completely by myself, and I put some nice music on, and then I engaged with heaven and went through the same process as I've just repeated. And guess what, guys? I haven't experienced that paralysis since that date. And that paralysis has been nasty for me, by the way. And I've experienced something that is great and much greater than that. So not only did God remove the trauma that led to the paralysis, and let me interject here. I believe that behind the trauma, there's actually there's a spiritual substance, an entity that is removed with it. Nothing is just plainly physical as we think it is. And we can understand this from quantum physics. And I'm not going to get into that now. But what I am going to say is underneath the trauma, there is a spiritual element, and some would say entity to it. So underneath the pattern in my brain, that was a mirror of my mind that allowed me to go into sleep paralysis, there is a spiritual entity behind it. And there was actually 2 in that case, of which 2 I removed. And around a week after that, I had an experience where my body went into what seemed like paralysis, but it was a complete different feeling. And I could feel my consciousness start to lift into the heavenly realms and begin to see light all around me. So what the enemy tried to use for my destruction, God removed to show me the holy root that in the lush green grass of my mind would begin to build a heavenly pattern as we removed the one that was unrighteous. So guys, I'm going to start to bring this to an end now because I don't want it to go too much over an hour. But my aim in here has been to, first of all, give the message of immortality, because all of this is about immortality. The renewal of the mind and the body is centered in immortality, okay? I was talking, of course, about the body and the nervous system, the mind, the body, etc. And we got a little bit biological for a while. And that was to give you an idea. And that was to also help you understand that these things are common knowledge, okay? What I'm talking about isn't airy-fairy stuff. And that we're in control of it all, guys. We're in control of it all. And that when some people say that trauma can't ever really be taken away, it's not the truth. The truth is that Christ is the truth, and the truth will set you free if you know it. So what an absolutely amazing gift we have to have a relationship with Jesus Christ that would take us in the realms and in the arms of immortality through trauma, renewing the mind, removing any spiritual entities that have a foothold in us, and thus renewing the body. That our cellular structure and our genetic structure would change in accordance to the record of immortality, because that, on a physical level, is exactly what is happening inside of you as you embark on this journey. Wow. So guys, I hope you have enjoyed this today. I've enjoyed speaking about this, and I would love to hear what you have to say. And remember, guys, we are learners. We aren't experts. We're learning on the job. I am a complete learner. I position myself as a learner. I'm sure there's many of you that would listen to this that would know a lot more than me. However, this is my revelation that I extend to you, knowing that what I have received, there's certain things in here that you can take that will blow you into the next part of your journey. I love you guys. Thank you so much for listening to this. Shalom.